There is a stretch in almost every serious man's life that no one ever congratulates him for. It is the stretch before he is anyone, before the title, before the income, before the body, before the audience, before the recognition, before the voice on the phone of an old friend changes its tone with him, because he has, in some visible way, become someone. It is the long, uncelebrated season in which he is building, mostly in the dark, with no one paying attention, no one applauding, no one telling him he is on the right path, no one even particularly aware that he is on a path at all. This is the cold stretch. It is colder than people understand from the outside, because it is not just lonely in the social sense. It is lonely in the structural sense. He is not just alone in his room. He is alone in his vision. He is alone in his belief that what he is doing matters. He is alone in his suspicion that the man he is becoming will one day be more than the man who currently is. He is, in many cases, the only person in his entire life who can see the future version of himself with any clarity, and even his own sight of it flickers on bad days. He goes to dinners and listens to people talk about their visible lives, their jobs, their children, their houses, their travel, their public milestones. He nods along. He participates politely. He does not talk about what he is really building, because he has noticed something. When he does mention it, people's eyes glaze over slightly, or they ask polite questions and forget the answers within a minute, or they smile in that small, indulgent way that adults reserve for children explaining their grand plans. He stops bringing it up. He starts keeping his real work to himself. He gives the world the surface answers it wants and saves the real ones for himself. He goes home. He sits at his desk or at his table or in his car after a long shift. He looks at the small evidence of his quiet construction. A document, a spreadsheet, a sketch, a draft, a pattern of routines he is still trying to keep, a small bank account that does not yet contain what it needs to contain, a body that is becoming something but is not yet the thing he is aiming at, a skill that is improving but is still not at the level where it can be visibly cashed in. Everything in front of him is an unfinished thing. Nothing is at the stage where anyone could look at it and call it impressive. And inside that stillness, he often has to face a sentence that comes back to him, whether he invites it or not. Nobody believes in this except me. That sentence, if he is honest, contains the deepest fact of his current life. His parents may love him, but they do not believe in what he is doing. His friends may like him, but they do not see what he sees. His partner, if he has one, may support him in a general way, but she does not actually share his conviction about the path. There is no investor, no mentor, no champion, no sponsor, no patron, no audience. There is only him and the quiet work and the long stretch of time during which the work has not yet produced anything other people can recognize. This is the cold stretch. Most men do not survive it. Not because they die, because they quit, silently, somewhere in the middle, without ceremony. They drift back into the consensus life that the world around them was already living. They take the safe job. They abandon the project. They let the routine collapse. They marry the wrong person to fill the silence. They surround themselves with noise that drowns out the small, persistent voice that was once telling them that they were meant for something specific. The cold stretch wears them down. The lack of validation gnaws at them. The absence of belief from others eventually erodes their belief in themselves. And one day, the man who was supposed to be becoming someone simply stops, without anyone noticing, and the world fills the space he was going to occupy with somebody else who did not stop. But a smaller number of men do not stop. They walk through the cold stretch. They keep building while nobody is clapping. They keep training while nobody is timing them. They keep saving while nobody is impressed. They keep practicing while nobody is grading them. They keep refining while nobody is monitoring the progress. They keep their head down through years of quiet, unrewarded effort, and they let the stretch do what only the stretch can do: forge a man whose foundation was not built on applause. This monologue is for those men, and for the men who want to become those men, and for the men who suspect, somewhere in their chest, that they are inside the cold stretch right now, and that they have begun to wonder whether they will make it through. If you can feel even a small piece of yourself standing inside that stretch as you read this, write cold. Because the strongest men are almost always built there, in the long, cold, uncelebrated season, before anyone has any reason to believe in them. And especially before they have learned to believe in themselves, through anything other than their own daily refusal to quit. There is a strange asymmetry in the way the world distributes belief. Belief arrives late. It does not show up in the early years, when it would actually make the work easier. It does not show up when a man is still uncertain, still struggling, still raw. It does not show up when he needs it most. It tends to show up much later, after the work has already started producing something visible, at the point where he needs it least. By the time other people begin to believe in him, he has usually been carrying the work alone for so long that their belief feels almost ornamental. He is glad to receive it, but he has already learned that he can build without it. This is not because people are cruel. It is because of how human nature is structured. People are wired to believe in evidence, not in potential. They will tell you in vague language that they believe in your potential. They will not actually act on it. Their behavior will continue to assume that you are who you currently appear to be. They will assume your future will look much like your present. They will not, in any structural way, allocate their trust, their resources, their attention, or their loyalty on the basis of what you might become. They will wait. They will hold their cards. They will withhold serious engagement until you have demonstrated, through visible results, that the future version of you is becoming real. This is the great misunderstanding most young men have about the world. They believe that if they just talk about their vision well enough, if they just communicate their ambition clearly enough, if they just expose their dreams to the right people, somebody will see what they see and step forward to support them. They imagine that there is a mentor waiting to find them, a patron waiting to fund them, a circle waiting to embrace them, a community waiting to recognize them. This is, with rare exceptions, not how it works. Most mentors, when approached by an unproven young man, do not commit. They give vague encouragement. They say polite, hedged things. They direct him toward general resources. They keep their real engagement, their serious attention, their actual mentorship, for people who have already done enough work that their potential has stopped being theoretical. They invest in motion, not intention. They engage with the man who is already swinging in the dark, not the one who is still hoping someone will hand him the bat. Most patrons, similarly, fund finished or near-finished things. They are not looking for raw potential. They are looking for traction. They want to see that something already works in some small way. They want to see that other people have begun to engage. They want to see that the man asking for support has already invested enough of his own time, money, and reputation, that the request is not purely speculative. Most communities do not embrace unproven men. They include them politely. They allow them to attend. They tolerate them. But they do not center them. They do not orient around them. They do not give them the kind of social investment that would make their lives easier. They watch, mostly, to see what the man does. If he produces something, the community will start treating him differently. If he does not, the community will simply continue to be polite, while keeping its real warmth for those who have demonstrated their seriousness. This is the structural reality. Belief from others is something a man earns by walking, often for years, through a stretch in which no one is offering it. When you understand this clearly, two things happen. The first is that you stop being injured by the absence of belief. The absence stops feeling like a personal verdict. It stops feeling like proof that you are not worth believing in. You begin to understand that it is the default state. It is the way the world treats every unproven man. It is not aimed at you specifically. It is a structural feature of how human attention and trust work. The second is that you stop wasting energy trying to manufacture belief in other people prematurely. You stop trying to convince them. You stop trying to perform your potential. You stop trying to recruit a chorus of supporters. You accept that belief, when it arrives, will be a byproduct of work that has already been done, not a precondition for it. You redirect the energy you were spending on convincing other people into the only place it can actually produce returns: the work itself. This is one of the great quiet liberations in a man's life. He stops needing the world to believe in him in order to keep working. He stops measuring his progress by how many people are clapping. He stops treating other people's skepticism as evidence against his vision. He starts treating it as background weather. He keeps building, regardless of who is watching, regardless of who is rooting for him, regardless of who is currently underestimating him. He has accepted that the belief he is waiting for will not arrive until long after he has stopped needing it, and so he proceeds without it. There is something almost monastic about this kind of orientation. It is not bitter. It is not aggrieved. It is not full of resentment toward the people who failed to believe. It is just clear-eyed about how the world works and what is being asked of him by his own ambitions. Machiavelli observed that men become great precisely by overcoming difficulties and obstacles source. One of the most underestimated obstacles is the absence of belief from others during the early years. It is not a dramatic obstacle. It is not a visible enemy. It is a silent, persistent ambient condition. Most men fail to overcome it, not because they cannot do the work, but because the long absence of external belief slowly hollows out their internal belief. They give up, not because the work is impossible, but because the loneliness of working without applause becomes more painful than the prospect of mediocrity. The men who become strong learn to walk through this loneliness without it dissolving them. That is the first great test of the cold stretch. The danger of working without belief is not just emotional. It is structural. When you are around people who do not believe in what you are doing, their doubt begins, slowly, to infect your own. This is not because you are weak. It is because of how the human nervous system is built. We are deeply social creatures. We absorb the emotional climate of the people around us, often without conscious awareness. If the people around you treat your project as small, your nervous system begins, over time, to treat it as small. If the people around you treat your ambitions as unrealistic, you begin, over time, to feel them as unrealistic. If the people around you treat your direction as eccentric, you begin, over time, to wonder if your direction is wrong. This contamination is rarely dramatic. It happens in small comments, in subtle changes of tone, in the way certain topics get changed when you bring them up, in the way certain people's eyes drift when you talk about your work, in the way no one asks the follow-up question that would indicate genuine engagement, in the way your name does not come up, in any serious way, in conversations about the future, in the way nobody, when listing the people they expect to do something significant, includes you. You absorb all of this. You do not always know you are absorbing it, but your unconscious mind is constantly tallying the social signals and slowly building, on the basis of those signals, a picture of who you are and what you can become. If the picture being built is small, your behavior eventually conforms to the small picture, often without your conscious consent. This is the silent erosion of self-belief that the cold stretch performs on most men. It is not done deliberately. The people in your life are not, in most cases, trying to undermine you. They are simply reflecting back at you the only version of you they can see. They can see the current you. They cannot see the future you. They cannot see what you are becoming. They cannot see the trajectory. They can only see the snapshot. And the snapshot, in the early years, is not impressive. It is not the kind of snapshot that produces belief in other people, and the absence of their belief begins to weaken yours. This is why so many serious men, somewhere in their early years, go through a strange psychological storm in which they begin to doubt themselves more than the work warrants. The work has not actually failed. It is just early. They are simply midway through the long stretch in which nothing is visible yet. But the loneliness has weakened their interior, and now their interior is generating storms that the actual conditions do not justify. They begin to wonder if their vision was always a fantasy. They begin to suspect that their ambitions were inflated. They begin to consider that maybe the polite indifference of the people around them is in fact accurate. Maybe they were never as exceptional as they thought. Maybe their hunger was just delusion. Maybe their seriousness was just compensation for some underlying inadequacy. If a man cannot manage this internal storm, the storm will eventually align his actions with his new doubt. He will start cutting back his efforts. He will start lowering his ambitions. He will start renegotiating his targets downward, telling himself, this is maturity. He will start integrating into the consensus life, telling himself, it is wisdom. He will, in effect, complete the project the social atmosphere has been quietly executing on him for years. The men who survive the cold stretch do something specific. They learn to maintain an internal belief that is not dependent on the external climate. This is not the same thing as delusion. It is not the same thing as pretending the work is already great when it is not. It is not the same thing as ignoring legitimate feedback. It is something more specific. It is the ability to hold, internally, a stable sense of the man you are becoming, regardless of what the social atmosphere around you is reflecting back at you. You do this through several disciplines, often unconsciously. You stop discussing the work with people who do not have the capacity to engage with it seriously. You hold the work close. You stop opening it for casual judgment. You stop submitting it for approval from the wrong audience. You begin to seek out, even in small doses, signals from people or sources that can see what you are building. Not necessarily mentors, not necessarily peers, sometimes books, sometimes long-dead figures whose stories resemble yours, sometimes a quiet community of strangers online who are doing similar things. You triangulate. You find evidence, somewhere, that your direction is not crazy. You begin to keep your own private record of progress, so that you are not entirely dependent on the perceptions of others to know whether you are moving. You watch the small numbers, the reps, the hours, the drafts, the minor improvements that nobody else notices. You become, in effect, the auditor of your own progress. You do not need someone else to confirm that you are advancing. You begin to treat the silence and skepticism of others as a feature of the early years, rather than a referendum on your worth. You stop asking the world to validate you. You give yourself permission to operate without that validation. You agree, internally, that the validation will come later, or not at all, and either way, you will keep going. If this is the discipline you are slowly trying to build inside yourself, right hold. Because the men who hold their own interior against the doubt of others are the ones who eventually do the work the doubters had implicitly bet against. There is something happening in the cold stretch that no one in your environment can fully see. You are accumulating. Every hour of unwatched effort is going somewhere. It is not evaporating. It is being deposited into the slow, almost invisible account of your capability. Your skills are sharpening. Your knowledge is deepening. Your reflexes are improving. Your body is changing. Your judgment is maturing. Your taste is refining. Your network of small understandings is widening. Your capacity for sustained effort is expanding. Your tolerance for delayed gratification is hardening. Your nervous system is being trained to function effectively in conditions that would derail other men. None of this is visible to your social circle. They see the same man at the same dinner, talking about the same things, living in the same apartment, working the same job, looking, on the surface, mostly the same as he did last year. They cannot see the inside of the workshop. They cannot see the practice. They cannot see the studying at night. They cannot see the drafts. They cannot see the slow shaping of an ability that will, eventually, become visible all at once. You can sometimes barely see it yourself. This is one of the cruelest properties of compound effort. In the early years, it produces almost nothing visible. The graph of progress is almost flat. You can put in hundreds of hours and have very little to show for it externally. The effort accumulates, but the outputs lag. You can feel, sometimes, almost foolish. You can wonder if all the effort is producing anything at all. It is. It is producing the latent capacity that will, at some point, begin to produce visible results. Compound effort does not produce a steady, linear output. It produces something closer to a long, almost imperceptible curve that, after enough time, suddenly steepens. The output that took years to develop starts arriving in larger and larger amounts, in shorter and shorter periods. The skill becomes visible. The body becomes visible. The work becomes visible. The competence becomes visible. And the people who were not paying attention conclude that you became someone overnight, when in fact you became someone in a series of thousands of small, unwatched moments stretched over years. The cold stretch is the period in which the slope of the curve is still flat. The man who quits during this period quits before the curve has begun to steepen. He sees the flat slope, mistakes it for evidence that nothing is happening, and walks away. He never gets to see what would have happened if he had stayed long enough for the curve to bend. The man who survives is the man who has, in effect, made an internal agreement with the mathematics. He has accepted that the early effort will not produce proportionate visible returns. He has accepted that the work will look like it is not working for a long time. He has accepted that he must keep depositing into an account whose balance is mostly invisible, trusting that the deposits are accumulating, trusting that one day the balance will become large enough to spend on something significant. This is one of the great mental moves in any serious masculine development. You stop measuring success by daily visible output and start measuring it by the maintenance of the underlying behavior. Did you put in the work today? Did you keep your routine? Did you make the deposit, however small? Did you preserve the structure that, over years, will produce the result? If yes, the day was successful, regardless of what visible output it produced. If no, the day failed, even if the output happened to look acceptable from outside. This reframing is what allows men to keep going through years in which nothing dramatic happens. There is a man at 28 who has been quietly working on a particular set of skills for 4 years. He is not famous. He has not made any money from the skills yet. He has nothing visible to show for the 4 years. He has, in some sense, less external evidence of progress than the friends around him who have been climbing more conventional ladders. He goes to a family event. People ask him what he is doing. He gives a brief, vague answer. He sees something flicker across their faces, the soft pity adults reserve for adult children who have not yet arrived. He returns home that night, with that flicker still in his mind. But the next morning, at 6, he is at his desk again. Not because he feels confident, not because the day before convinced him of anything, because his identity has reorganized itself around the principle that the work continues, regardless of how it looks from outside. He has accepted that he is depositing into an account that the family event could not see. He has accepted that the deposits are accumulating, even if no one believes that. 3 years later, the curve begins to bend. The skills, finally, start producing visible outputs. He releases something into the world that meets a response. Then another. Then another. Within a few more years, the same family that gave him the pitying flicker is asking him for his opinions on their own children's careers. The contrast is jarring. He is the same man. The work was the same work. The only thing that has changed is that the visible output has now caught up to the underlying accumulation. This is the quiet mathematics of compound, unwatched effort. It almost always looks unimpressive in the early years. It almost always looks miraculous in the later years. The people who do not understand the math will misread both phases. They will misread the early years as failure and the later years as luck. The people who understand the math know that both phases are continuous expressions of the same underlying truth. The work was always producing something. It just took a long time to become visible. The strongest men make their peace with this math early. They stop expecting the visible output to match the input on a daily basis. They make their deposits. They wait. They keep going. They trust the curve. There is a kind of self-belief that is healthy and necessary for the cold stretch. There is another kind that looks similar and is actually destructive. The first kind is grounded. It is a quiet, internal sense that the work is worth doing, that you are capable of the work, and that, over a long enough timeline, the work will produce something. It is not loud. It is not self-aggrandizing. It does not need to convince anyone. It does not require constant external validation. It does not produce big claims about who you are or what you will accomplish. It is, more than anything, a stable internal posture from which you can keep showing up. The second kind is inflated. It is a loud, almost performative belief in your own greatness that is largely uncoupled from your actual current behavior or capability. It declares its destiny. It tells stories about itself. It expects others to be impressed by its self-conception. It requires constant validation, even though it pretends not to. It collapses easily when reality offers contradictory feedback. It is, structurally, a defense mechanism against the very doubt it pretends to have transcended. Many men, attempting to survive the cold stretch, mistake the second kind for the first. They cannot find quiet, grounded belief in themselves, so they inflate. They tell themselves they are exceptional. They tell other people they are exceptional. They wrap themselves in a story of destiny that the work has not yet earned. They go on social media and proclaim their future. They take on the language of the successful before they have done the work that produces success. They confuse the appearance of confidence with the substance of competence. This inflation, in the short term, can feel like fuel. It can keep a man going through stretches where his actual confidence is thin. It can give him a story to lean on when the doubts get loud. It can produce, occasionally, the kind of brashness that gets a few easy wins early. But inflation does not survive contact with reality for long. Reality is a brutal editor of inflated self-belief. It tests your claims constantly. It puts you in situations where your declared identity is supposed to perform, and the inflation cannot. The skill is not actually there. The competence is not actually there. The structure is not actually there. The man's real abilities do not match his public claims, and the gap becomes visible. Sometimes to him, sometimes to others, sometimes to both. When the gap becomes visible to others, he loses credibility. People realize his confidence was costume. They quietly reduce their estimation of him. When the gap becomes visible to him, internally, he experiences something that often functions like collapse. The inflated identity cannot survive the contact with his own actual incompetence. He either doubles down into more inflation, becoming louder and more obnoxious, or he crashes into a strange depression in which he questions whether he is anything at all. Neither response is healthy. The healthier response is to have built, from the beginning, the first kind of self-belief, not the second. The first kind is built on different foundations. It is built on observed evidence. It is built on the small wins that have accumulated, however quietly. It is built on the daily acts of discipline that you have in fact performed. It is built on the small problems you have in fact solved. It is built on the small skills you have in fact developed. It does not require you to have done anything spectacular. It only requires you to have done what you set out to do, consistently enough that you have personal evidence that you are capable of doing what you commit to. This kind of self-belief is, in some sense, earned daily. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you deposit a small amount of grounded self-belief into your interior. Every time you break a promise to yourself, you withdraw a small amount. Over years, the balance grows or shrinks depending on how often you keep or break your commitments to yourself. The grounded self-belief of a serious man is, in many ways, the long-term result of years of small-kept promises. This is why so many high-functioning men, in the cold stretch, focus less on the big declarations and more on the small consistencies. They get up when they said they would get up. They train when they said they would train. They write when they said they would write. They study when they said they would study. They refuse the things they said they would refuse. They keep, in the small daily moments, the agreements they made with themselves, and in doing so, they slowly accumulate, in their own interior, the evidence that they are capable of operating from agreements, not from impulses. This is what real confidence is built on. Not on declarations, on evidence. Evidence that you can do what you said you would do. Evidence that you can endure what others would not endure. Evidence that you can keep going when others would stop. Evidence that your behavior is loyal to your stated values when those values are not being observed. The man with this kind of evidence has a different relationship to other people's doubt during the cold stretch. He does not need them to believe in him, because he has already built, in his own interior, a quiet record of his own reliability. He knows what he can count on himself for, regardless of what other people think he can count on himself for. Their disbelief is information about them, not about him. This is the only kind of self-belief that actually holds up across a long, hard stretch. The inflated kind tends to collapse. The grounded kind tends to compound. If you can feel the difference inside yourself, and you are slowly choosing to build the grounded kind, write evidence. Because the man who keeps small promises to himself in private is the man who becomes capable, eventually, of keeping large promises to himself in public. There is something to be said for the privacy of the cold stretch. When you are not yet anyone in the world, no one is monitoring your construction. You can fail in private. You can experiment in private. You can be terrible at things in private. You can take strange detours in private. You can abandon entire approaches and try new ones in private. You can change your mind. You can change your method. You can change your aesthetic. You can become, in some sense, several different versions of yourself in succession before you arrive at the one you are going to be. This privacy is one of the most underrated gifts of the cold stretch. Most successful men, once they are visible, lose this privacy. Everything they do is interpreted. Everything they say is recorded. Every change of direction is scrutinized. Every misstep is amplified. They become, in some sense, prisoners of their visibility. They have to be careful about what they try, because the cost of trying and failing in public is much higher than the cost of trying and failing in private. If you are inside the cold stretch right now, you are not yet a prisoner of your visibility, because you do not yet have any. This is, paradoxically, freedom. You can write 20 bad drafts, and no one will know. You can train at a level that is embarrassing to your future self, and no one will see. You can launch the wrong project and have it fail in front of an audience of 0. You can adopt and discard several aesthetic directions, several voice styles, several intellectual frameworks, several social positionings, and no one will notice. You can become several different versions of yourself in succession, and the world will continue to register only the surface version, the one that does the predictable things at the dinners and the family events. The deep version, the one that is constantly being re-engineered, is invisible to everyone but you. This is one of the most powerful things about being unknown. You have a vast, unwatched laboratory in which to do the experiments that will eventually produce the man the world will eventually see. The man who eventually emerges in public is the man who survived the experiments. The drafts that failed will never be visible. The phases you outgrew will never be archived. The skills that took years to develop will appear to the audience fully formed. They will not know that you spent 4 years sounding like an idiot before you started sounding like yourself. The visible version of you will, in fact, benefit enormously from the years in which there was no visible version. This is why some of the most powerful careers, businesses, and creative projects are built almost entirely in obscurity. The men behind them used the obscurity not as a curse, but as a gift. They had years and years in which no one was watching, and they used those years to do the messy, imperfect, deeply experimental work that produced, eventually, a level of craft that visibility could not have allowed. Visibility constrains experiment. Privacy enables it. If you can feel this, even partially, the cold stretch starts to look different. It stops being a punishment. It starts being a workshop. It stops being a sentence to obscurity. It starts being a granted permission to mess up freely, to evolve quietly, to construct something specific without anyone interfering or interpreting. There is a man at 25 who has spent 2 years quietly developing a body of work that no one has seen. He has not posted it. He has not shown it to friends. He has not even told most of his family that he is doing it. The work is, in his own judgment, still bad. It is not yet ready to be encountered by others. He is not ashamed of this. He is simply respecting the timeline of real development. He continues to make the work, refine the work, abandon parts of it, restart parts of it, study examples of better work, integrate what he learns, and slowly improve. After several more years, the work begins to reach a level he is willing to share. At that point, what he releases is not the early draft. It is the result of years of private experimentation. The public encounters a fully formed voice. The voice did not appear out of nowhere. It was built in silence. This is one of the deepest forms of strength a man can develop. The willingness to remain unknown for long enough that what he eventually becomes, when he becomes known, is something real. Most men cannot tolerate this. They rush to be seen. They put unfinished work into the world. They start brands before they have anything to say. They open companies before they have a real product. They take on identities before they have done the work that produces those identities. The visibility appears to be its own reward, but in fact it traps them in a public form that the underlying work cannot support. They spend the rest of their lives performing an identity that they never actually built. The men who become strongest are the ones who say no to premature visibility, not because they hate being seen, because they understand that the only kind of being seen that matters is the kind that is preceded by years of being unseen well. There is a particular kind of loneliness that lives inside the cold stretch. If you stay in the cold stretch long enough, that loneliness changes. In the early years, the loneliness is sharp. It feels like absence. It feels like the world has failed you. It feels like the wrong audience has been assigned to your life. You ache, sometimes, for someone to see what you are doing. You imagine the mentor who would have made everything easier. You imagine the partner who would have understood the work. You imagine the friend who would have asked the right questions. The absence of these figures presses on you. It hurts. Then, something interesting happens. After enough time, the loneliness stops being loneliness in the sharp sense. It becomes instead a kind of structural condition that you have adapted to. You stop aching for the missing audience. You stop fantasizing about the missing mentor. You stop imagining the figure who would have made the work easier. You accept that the work has been your work to do, in your conditions, with your specific lack of external belief. You stop wishing it had been different. You begin, in some quiet way, to inhabit the conditions as if they had been designed for you specifically. This is one of the most important transformations a man undergoes in the cold stretch. The loneliness becomes home. You no longer think of the silence as a deprivation. You begin to think of it as a workspace. You realize, slowly, that you have built a kind of intimacy with your own life that most men never achieve. Precisely because most men never spend enough unaccompanied time inside their own existence to develop this intimacy. The silence has taught you things about yourself that crowds never could. The unwitnessed effort has revealed things about your character that performance would have obscured. The privacy has made it possible for you to take your own thoughts seriously in a way that constant social input would have interrupted. You become, in some sense, your own first audience. You become the person who first sees your own work, the person who first responds to your own work, the person who first decides whether your own work is meeting your own standard. You become the person who first congratulates yourself for showing up. You become the person who first calls yourself out when you have been sloppy. You become the person who first holds the line on the standards you have decided matter. This is a strange kind of self-relationship. It does not come naturally. It is built, over time, by repeated experience inside the cold stretch. You become accustomed to being the one who is present at your own becoming. You become accustomed to being the one who reads the small markers of your own progress. You become accustomed to being the one who decides what counts and what does not, what matters and what does not, what is acceptable and what falls short. The loneliness in this register stops being painful. It becomes, in some surprising way, almost pleasant. It becomes the condition in which your real work happens. It becomes the space in which your real self exists. It becomes the territory you have claimed against the noise of the rest of the world. When other people eventually arrive, and they will, once your work becomes visible enough that they decide it is worth their attention, you find that you are no longer dependent on them. You are glad to have them. You are happy to engage. You can be warm, generous, even celebratory. But their arrival does not produce the relief you might have once expected, because you have already built a life in which their absence stopped being painful. They are additions, not arrivals. They are extras, not essentials. They cannot make you, because you have already made yourself. They cannot save you, because you no longer need saving. This is what real sovereignty in a man looks like. It is not about being unable to receive other people. It is about being whole enough not to need them in a structural sense. The strongest men carry this kind of sovereignty quietly into every later phase of their lives. They have spent so much time alone with the work that other people's reactions, when those reactions eventually come, do not destabilize them. Praise does not inflate them. Criticism does not collapse them. The arrival of an audience does not change their underlying behavior. They continue to do the work the way they always did it, regardless of who is watching. The watching, in some sense, has become irrelevant. There is a man at 40 who, after years of working in obscurity, finds himself in front of audiences who treat him as someone significant. He notices, with some surprise, that he does not need the audiences. He enjoys them in moderate ways. He is grateful for them. But he could continue his life without them. The work would continue. The discipline would continue. The standard would continue. The man inside the public-facing image is not dependent on the public-facing image to know who he is or what he is doing. This is one of the cleanest signs that a man was actually built in the cold stretch. The audience can come or go. He remains himself. The loneliness has become not just home, but ballast. There is a pattern that other people will run on you later, once you have started to become someone. It is worth understanding before you encounter it. For years, while you were building, most people did not believe in you. They did not invest in you. They did not engage with your work. They did not orient around your direction. They watched, mostly, from a respectful distance. Some doubted you openly. Many doubted you quietly. The cold stretch was, in some sense, defined by the structural absence of their belief. Once your work becomes visible, this pattern reverses, often abruptly. People begin to express belief in you. Some of them will speak as if they always believed in you. Some of them will speak as if they were among your earliest supporters. Some of them will frame themselves as having seen all along what you were going to become. Their belief, suddenly, is loud. Their certainty about your talent and trajectory is, somehow, unwavering. This is one of the strangest experiences a man can have. You are the same man you were 5 years ago. You have the same vision, the same work ethic, the same direction. The only thing that has changed is that the work has become visible. The visibility has caused the social atmosphere around you to flip. The same people who treated your work as small now treat it as significant. The same people who treated your direction as eccentric now treat it as inevitable. The same people who treated your ambition as inflated now treat it as accurate. You are tempted, in this moment, to enjoy the reversal. It is human to enjoy it. You worked alone for years. Now people are finally seeing. There is a small, satisfied part of you that wants to receive the late belief warmly, to welcome the converts, to accept their new framing of the relationship, to allow them to write themselves into your story as long-standing supporters. If you do this, you will pay a price later. Because the people who shift from disbelief to belief, based on visible evidence, are running a pattern that has nothing to do with you. They are running the pattern of always backing what has already proven itself, regardless of what they thought of it before it proved itself. They will do the same thing to other people, in other contexts, again and again. They are not loyal to your vision. They are loyal to the proven thing. The proven thing happens to currently be you. The day your visible work hits a rough patch, their belief will adjust, downward, in proportion to the contraction of visible evidence. The same warmth that flooded in when the evidence was strong will quietly recede when the evidence weakens. They are weather-dependent supporters. They were weather-dependent during the cold stretch, when the weather was bad. They are weather-dependent now, when the weather is good. The weather is the variable, not you. A man who understands this enters the bright stretch with a different orientation. He receives the late belief politely. He does not refuse it. He does not insult it. He does not make a scene about it. But he does not internalize it as proof of anything. He remembers, in his interior, where these people stood during the cold years. He does not require them to be different than they are. He simply does not allocate them, internally, the position of people who actually believed in him. The position of people who actually believed in him is reserved, in his interior, for the few. The handful who came to see the work when it was still bad. The handful who said the encouraging thing when it would have cost them nothing to say nothing. The handful who showed up without needing the visibility as a precondition. These people, often, never make a loud point of having believed. They were just present. Their belief was quiet, undemonstrative, unconditional. He keeps a private list of these people in his head, even if he never writes it down. He keeps them close. He invests in them. He returns their early loyalty with later loyalty. When his life shifts in ways that produce new advantages, he brings them with him, in whatever ways are appropriate. He does not forget who was there when there was no reason to be there. He treats their presence in his early years as one of the most important social facts of his life. This is one of the deepest forms of social maturity. You do not punish the late believers. You do not lecture them. You do not refuse their company. You simply do not allocate them the place that belongs to the early ones. You keep your inner ranking honest, even when the social atmosphere is trying to revise the rankings on your behalf. There is a man who, after years of obscurity, begins to receive serious public attention. Several people from his earlier life reappear with warm energy and the implication that they were always rooting for him. He receives them politely. He shares meals. He participates in some of the new dynamics. But he does not write any of them onto the list of people whose loyalty he is structurally going to repay over the rest of his life. That list is short. It contains, mostly, names that the public would not recognize. People who never made themselves visible. People who simply showed up in small, undramatic ways during the years when there was nothing to gain. He carries that list with him into the rest of his life. He invests in those names. He defends them. He brings them with him whenever he can. He never makes a public show of it. He does not need to. He knows. They know. The reciprocity is private and durable. This is one of the small ways a man's integrity, in the cold stretch, produces returns later. You are not just building yourself. You are also, quietly, identifying the people who deserve your loyalty for the rest of your life. If you stay inside the cold stretch long enough, doing the work, holding your own interior, calibrating your relationships, refining your standards, you eventually walk out of it. Not necessarily into fame, not necessarily into wealth, not necessarily into any specific external marker, but you walk out of the cold stretch into a different relationship with yourself, with your work, and with the world. The man who walks out is different from the man who walked in. He is harder to bait. He is harder to destabilize. He is harder to flatter. He is harder to recruit. He is harder to break. The years of operating without external belief have built inside him a stable interior that does not require external belief to function. He has learned that he can keep going under conditions that most men cannot tolerate. He has internal evidence accumulated daily that he can be relied upon by himself to do what he committed to do. This evidence is one of the most precious things a man can own. It cannot be transferred. It cannot be inherited. It cannot be purchased. It cannot be performed. It can only be built slowly, in private, through repeated daily acts of fidelity to his own standards, under conditions where no one would have noticed if he had failed to honor them. The man who has spent years building this evidence has, in some sense, become unmistakable to himself. He knows what he is. He knows what he can do. He knows what he is willing to refuse. He knows what he is willing to endure. This kind of man does not need other people to tell him what he is. Other people can tell him things, of course. Some of those things will be true. Some will be flattering. Some will be insulting. Some will be wildly inaccurate. He will take them all in, weigh them, decide what is useful and what is noise. But none of them will move his core. His core has been built independently of their input. They cannot now establish it, because it was built without them. They cannot now destroy it, for the same reason. He is, in some real sense, beyond their power to define. This is the strange, almost ironic outcome of the cold stretch. The years in which other people did not believe in him produced a man who no longer requires anyone to believe in him. He has become his own first source of belief, and over time, his own most reliable source of belief, and eventually, his own only required source of belief. Other people can join the chorus or not. The chorus does not produce the song. The song was being produced in private long before there was any audience. This is also the kind of man whose work the world eventually trusts most deeply. Because the world, while it usually fails to recognize potential early, is fairly good at recognizing competence late. When a man walks into the visible phase of his life, carrying the kind of foundation that the cold stretch produces, people sense it. They sense the depth. They sense the structural reality underneath the visible output. They sense that the man in front of them is not a marketing campaign, not a performance, not a costume. He is, in some real way, the result of years of unwatched construction. The work he produces feels different. The presence he brings into rooms feels different. The integrity of his commitments feels different. People orient differently around such men. They give them more serious attention. They trust them more deeply. They invest in them more readily. They follow them more loyally. They engage with their work with a different kind of seriousness, because they sense that the work is the product of a serious man, not a serious performance. The man who walks out of the cold stretch is, in this sense, structurally different from the man who never went in. He has weight that cannot be faked. He has depth that cannot be performed. He has a kind of unconscious sovereignty that produces, almost without his effort, the respect that other men spend their lives trying to manufacture through louder behavior. There is a man at 45 who has spent his 20s and 30s in a kind of structural obscurity. No one in his early circles believed in what he was doing. His parents found him eccentric. His friends found him serious in ways they could not relate to. His romantic partners often grew impatient with the long timeline of his work. He did the work anyway, quietly, year after year. He is, now, somewhere people quietly listen to, somewhere others look to for opinions, somewhere the work he spent decades doing has begun to produce returns that are visible to even the most casual observer. He does not feel triumphant about this. He does not feel vindicated. He feels, mostly, calm. He continues to work the way he worked before. He continues to follow the same routines. He continues to hold the same standards. He continues to give the same daily attention to the small things. The visibility has not changed him. It has only changed how the world sees him. And he is grateful for the visibility, but he is not dependent on it. He could lose it tomorrow and continue exactly the same internal life. This is the deepest fruit of the cold stretch. A man whose external success is real but optional. Real in the sense that it actually exists. Optional in the sense that his interior is not contingent on it. This is what almost no one can produce by any route other than years of doing the work when no one was watching, no one was believing, and no one was promising that any of it would ever matter. If you are reading this from inside the cold stretch, there are a few things worth saying to you directly. First, you are not delusional. The fact that no one currently believes in you is not, in itself, evidence that there is nothing in you worth believing in. The absence of external belief is structural, not personal. The world does not believe in unproven men. It does not believe in unproven anything. It waits for evidence. Your job is not to convince it. Your job is to keep building, in private, the evidence that will, eventually, be available. Second, the loneliness will not last forever in its current sharp form. If you stay inside the work, the loneliness will over time transform. It will become less painful. It will become more familiar. It will eventually become a kind of inner room you have learnt to inhabit, with its own quiet pleasures. It will stop being a deprivation and start being a workspace. This transformation is not magic. It is the natural result of long practice in your own company. Third, the people whose belief you currently lack are mostly not going to give it to you in the form you imagine. You should stop waiting for it. You should stop interpreting its absence as a personal verdict. You should stop trying to engineer it through better explanations of yourself. You should redirect that energy into the work, where it can actually produce returns. Fourth, The small daily acts you are performing right now, the ones that nobody sees, the ones that produce no visible result, the ones that feel almost foolish in their disproportion to the lack of outcome, those acts are not meaningless. They are accumulating. They are depositing into the slow account of your future capability. The fact that you cannot see the balance does not mean the balance does not exist. The balance is real. It is just lagging the deposits in the way that all serious construction does. Fifth, the friends, family members, and acquaintances who currently doubt you are not necessarily your enemies. Most of them are simply living inside the consensus understanding of who you currently are. They do not have the imagination, or the patience, or the structural reason to bet on who you might become. They will, in many cases, update their understanding of you when you give them new visible evidence to update it on. Some of them will, even later, claim they always believed in you. Receive that with calm. Do not internalize it as anything other than what it is. Sixth, the small handful of people who do believe in you right now, the parent who quietly supports your direction, the friend who asks the right question, the partner who does not require you to abandon the long timeline, the mentor who writes back to your email when no one else does. Those people are not common. They are rare. They are the early signal of the kind of loyalty that will mean something for the rest of your life. Treat them well. Remember who they are. Carry them with you when your circumstances eventually shift. Seventh, the version of you that will eventually walk out of the cold stretch will be substantially different from the version that walked in. You will not recognize yourself in some ways. You will have developed reflexes, capabilities, judgments, standards, and a kind of internal sovereignty that the early version of you could only have imagined abstractly. This transformation is not free. It is paid for by the years you are in right now. The years that feel like they are producing nothing are, in fact, producing the man who will, eventually, produce everything else. Eighth, and perhaps most importantly, the strongest men in any field are almost always built this way. There are very few real exceptions. Almost everyone whose presence in the world commands attention spent some long, dark, uncelebrated stretch in obscurity before they emerged. They did the work when no one was watching. They held their own interior when no one was supporting it. They built their identity in silence. They became, in private, the man whose public form would eventually be visible. The fact that you are currently inside such a stretch is not a sign that you are failing. It is the standard precondition for becoming the kind of man you are aiming at. So if you are inside the cold stretch right now, if you are training in a body that no one is watching, building a skill that no one is recognizing, working a job whose ceiling you are quietly preparing to break, accumulating a private body of work that no one has yet seen, holding to a long timeline that no one around you understands, do not interpret the current loneliness as a verdict on your future. Interpret it as the workshop in which your real self is being built. Stay there. Do the work. Do not stop because no one is clapping. Do not stop because no one is offering belief. Do not stop because the curve has not yet bent. Do not stop because the people around you have, in their consensus way, decided that what you are doing is small. Stay in the cold stretch long enough that you walk out of it as someone the world has, finally to deal with on different terms. And when that day comes, and for the men who stay long enough, it usually does come in some form, you will discover that the most precious thing you took out of the cold stretch was not the visible result. It was the man you became while no one was looking. That man is, in some quiet way, the only thing that lasts. Money can leave. Audiences can leave. Health can leave. Circumstances can leave. The relationships you build now can leave. But the man you became in the cold stretch, the one with the unwatched discipline, the unbroken commitments, the unsupervised standards, the sovereign interior that no one had to authorize, that man stays with you. He carries you through whatever comes next. You are not failing right now. You are being built. If this monologue gave language to something you have been carrying for a long time, without being able to name it, leave a like. In the comments, tell me which section hit hardest. And subscribe if you want more monologues built for men who are still inside the cold stretch and are choosing, day by day, to become the kind of man that no one yet has any reason to believe in, except, finally, himself.